While we're getting a couple questions passed up here, I'll start off. So I'll throw this out to the last three speakers. What is the liability of media? What is the legal liability of media relative to concussions cases?
Well, I'm kind of on the team First Amendment, so I will hang my, my amateur legal shingle on that one. Obviously, you know, within media there's libel and things like that, but if we are making an honest effort to report the truth, the known truth, and not yelling fire in a crowded theater, I think we're pretty well covered in terms of being sports writers. But I'll let the lawyers answer that.
I've actually handled only one First Amendment / defamation case. It went well for my client. We got a defense verdict, but that's pretty much all I've got on the topic.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add?
First Amendment.
First Amendment rights, okay.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who are unaware, truth is an absolute defense, so, you know, I can provide that one tip.
Okay.
Or as I say, hashtag truth.
Hashtag.
So, yeah.
Fair enough. So this was actually a question from the morning session, but I knew we had some discussion about state legislation and education coming, so I saved it. Given the current evidence based on concussion recovery, what guidance would you give to states regarding the development of return to learn policies? I think we'll throw that to Dr. Chrisman and Dr. McLeod.
Yeah. Currently, among the state laws, I believe only 2 address return to learn. When you start to look at the Interscholastic Association policies, I think it's a little bit more. In fact, we just added return to learn to our state Interscholastic Association policy this year, but I think that is an area where we really need to push and make better strides. If you think about children and adolescents, they're students first, athletes second, and so we really need to focus on that aspect, educate the schools as well as the healthcare providers so that there's collaborative medical management.
Yeah, I would agree. It's an area that we've been interested in because I think a lot of schools really are looking for guidance and they're really kind of saying, what should we be doing with these kids? I mean, as a pediatrician, school is work for a kid, and a kid who's missing work is going to have impacts for, you know, further down the line. And so that's something that we really want to make sure that we can figure out how to get them back to school and how to really give them support through that.
Great, thank you. This is a webcast question for Dr. Castellani. Can you please address the recently published consensus NIH criteria on the neuropathological diagnosis of CTE?
Yeah, so there was a recent consensus group comprised, as I understand it, comprised of neuropathologists back in March who looked at a series of cases, and this is my understanding. I wasn't there. I was not invited. But there's a series of cases, and they looked at the criteria, and basically, as I understand it, found there's kind of a list of things, and some are major, some are minor, but basically they found that tau and a perivascular distribution was specific for whatever it is this is, and then tau and the depth of a sulcus was also one of the more specific findings. So that's the understanding, and of course, I mean, I've been asked about this before, and even prior to the consensus group meeting, and I think the findings were predictable based on the case series. I mean, I personally don't dispute the anatomical findings. I really more dispute, or at least raise questions about the meaning of those findings and the correlation of those findings with a clinical syndrome. So, and also, I think it's keep in mind that consensus and position statements, consensus, is not science. It's almost like the antithesis of science. So we can't, in other words, we can't figure something out. So let's form a consensus group and come up with some guidelines. So, but again, the bottom line is that there are a few specific features about this entity, and so it allows investigators to be a little bit more precise in their subclassification, and I think the main goal was to provide some sort of basis for future testing and to codify the diagnostic procedures. It doesn't change any of the basic underlying problems with the entity and the clinical pathological correlations, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. Okay, you're not done. Got another one for you. Could you please reiterate your position on the O'Malley study of Mike Webster's brain and how you believe his brain looks normal? This is from a webcast viewer. I'm curious to know why the NFL was alarmed by these findings if it is being said that the tissue looks as though it is not diseased.
Should I talk to a lawyer first about this? So there's a publication in 2005, and there's a photographic photomicrograph. That panel that I showed you was in the publication, and that's it. That's my knowledge of the case. So I don't, they had the entire brain. They described some changes, and my only point is that what was depicted in the paper, which is all I have seen, is I think could broadly be interpreted as normal aging. What they showed was diffuse plaque with amyloid beta. That's a normal age-related accumulation. It showed what one would call a pretangle in a neuron in the cerebral cortex, which can be found in anyone of that age. They demonstrated, I think, a neuropil thread in one of the photographs as well, which can be found in anyone of age 50. And there were other changes described in the actual text of the paper, where they described, I believe, extraneuronal pigment in the substantia nigra. Again, a 50-year-old, one would debate what that means. My point was the actual pathology from the standpoint of a neuropathologist was not very impressive at all. Now, there have been in some books some post hoc analysis of that case, and I personally don't think it's useful to get into that, because that's in a book, and it's not really medical literature. I mean, so if you go with what's in the scientific literature. Again, in my opinion, it was the findings there were a variation of normal, and that's my opinion. I hope I'm entitled to it. I don't know. I'm serious. I really, it is a little bit of a contentious and somewhat toxic area. So, and I don't doubt the sincerity of those doing the studies, and I'm not saying that there's any problems with where it came from, or any fabrication of anything whatsoever. I'm just saying, as I interpret that photograph, it's a variation of normal, and that comes from looking at literally thousands of brains over the years.
Well, thank you, and we certainly value your opinion and appreciate your willingness to share it with us. I'm not sure if this is for the panel. I might have to answer this one. Is there anyone tracking college athletes who leave school after a concussion? So Dr. Hainline, who had to catch a flight, so he left a little bit early, alluded to the CARE consortium that myself and Dr. McRae and Dr. McAllister are helping run. So our intent now, as we're enrolling 30,000 college student athletes over the next 3 years, well, actually another year and a half from now, is to track them for the rest of their lives. So we are seeking funding for that process, so there'll be a jar at the exit. Just drop your loose change in. We'd appreciate it. So there is no one doing it long term now, but it is certainly our intent to do that. And as Dr. Hainline referenced, he's just calling it the Framingham for concussion. I'm not going to be that bold, but that is our intent. So we'll get back to you in 50 years with the answer to that question. Given the multiple sources, this is for Ms. Gerstner, given the multiple sources of information these days for people who seek health information, how do most of those who are not medical experts, such as parents and athletes, who should we be listening to? We've seen today that even medical professionals don't always agree.
That's a really challenging question to answer, because it depends on where you're at, what you have access to, and what you're comfortable with. So I think a great place to start with is if your school or your school district has a good concussion policy, and hopefully they will then have an alliance with a local medical entity that will have resources. So it's basically building out rings upon rings upon rings to let people know where the information is. And I will say this, there's a number of great things that are out there, Mayo Clinic, University of Michigan. But we all know kind of what happens when someone gets an illness these days or thinks something's wrong. You know, we've all heard of Dr. Google. And that, a lot of times, is the first source people go to is they type in symptoms, and whatever bubbles to the top for a search engine, that's what people go with. So I think in this country in general, we need to have media literacy, both from political campaigns to what's going on in the world, to what's going on in medicine. And that's what we're trying to teach my students right now is critical thinking. Who is reporting it? Why are they reporting it? Is it good or bad? And do I trust this? Not just that it's on the magic screen in front of me, therefore it must be true.
Great, thank you. And I'd also add that everything that's been presented today is being stored, recorded, and it'll be posted up on the University of Michigan Injury Center website. In addition, we had some fabulous librarian work done ahead of time. There's a tremendous resource guide on there which has links to the CDC and a number of other publications, scientific publications surrounding concussion. So feel free to go there, and it's all public access, and have at it. Our last question, unless somebody throws one at me at the end, for our two attorneys, to what extent does litigation and expert witness drive the interpretation of science?
I guess I'll start. I think that what ends up happening is because all these cases settle, it's just going to keep remaining unsettled. So you're going to have someone bring a case with this legal theory that relies on science that might not really hold up, but because it doesn't get to court, you might still have other people bringing more cases based on that, regardless of whether it's viable, because since sometimes the settlements are even closed, you don't know what happened, and there's no actual judgment on it. So it's kind of a cyclical process, in my opinion.
You know, and with respect to experts, and it sounds like a cynical opinion or a comment, and it is, you know, anytime a lawsuit's filed, you're always going to have potential plaintiffs' experts, and you're always going to have potential defense experts. They're always going to rise to the top. You're going to be able to find them. So, you know, that educates the issue as well.
All right. Thank you very much. So that's the last of the questions that I have. I'd like to big round of applause for our panelists and all of our speakers today.